TJ here, Georgia Fishing Company. In the last couple weeks, we've talked about how to build a tarpon leader, and we've talked about how to identify rips and how the fish set up on those rips so that you know an idea of where to go and how to rig once you get there. But what I want to talk about now is how to set your spread up. There's a million different ways to do it, and people have different ideas. I'm certainly very opinionated because over the years I've just seen enough that I'm very strongly set in how I do it. But if you have some logic that would deter me from doing it my way and maybe do it your way a little bit, then I'm happy to hear it. So send it to me or leave it in the comments. But we'll get right into it. We'll use the whiteboard here. Let's imagine this is my boat and this is my spread. These red lines are your float lines. Are those blue? Yeah, that's blue. Blue lines are your flat lines or free lines. Basically, they don't have a float and they have no kind of weight on the blue lines. It's just a main line attached to a leader with a bait on the end, no weight, no float. So I'll fish my float lines long and my flat lines short. That way, since the flat lines aren't encumbered by a float, they can pass under the float lines without causing any tangles. If you did it the opposite way, then you'd have your float lines passing over the top of your flat lines and they'd snag it. So just consider that. You can modify this as needed. Sometimes, this bait keeps wanting to creep over one way or the other, so you shorten it and lengthen this one, whatever you've got to do. The important thing is that you just keep your spread nice and clean and separated. If you have to, completely eliminate that fifth line. Sometimes if the current's not very strong or if the wind's blowing across your lines, it's just too much to have 5 lines and you need to back it down to 4. So this is my setup, based totally on the fact that most of the time tarpon are feeding up. They want to look up and attack from the bottom. They're ambushing, much like a trout. They get below the bait, and as it comes over their head, they come up and ambush it. As opposed to, say, a redfish that's cruising the bottom. If you look at where a redfish's mouth is positioned, it's down on the bottom of his head. And if you've ever seen a redfish try to eat a topwater plug, it looks ridiculous because they're missing it most of the time because they're getting their whole body out of the water and trying to crash their head down on top of it, rather than whereas a trout or a tarpon, they come up and they just gulp it. They've got their eyes on it right until they open their mouth. A redfish has to completely lose eyesight of that bait when it's on the surface. So just looking at how the fish is built, they are built to take baits from below. Some people, let's just say they fish 4 lines. They'll fish a float line, a flat line, a middle line with like a 1/4 ounce sinker on it to get middle of the water column, and then a bottom line all the way on the bottom. So if you're looking at it, they've got the entire water column covered. I'm not really concerned about that. Let's say we're in something as deep as 30 feet and you've got 5 baits on the surface. Unless that tarpon is laying on the bottom, he's close enough to see those baits on the surface. That's where he's already looking. That's where he is fixing his attention. Especially if you're fishing where you're expecting pogies to be coming by, because that's where the pogies are most of the time. Those tarpon are going to be below them and looking up. So I'm putting my baits where the tarpon's eyes are. Now, the other reason that I don't fish that entire water column spread is if you'll look at this. These numbers are made up, they're approximations of what I've experienced when I fished that entire water column spread. If I had 4 lines and I was fishing a float, a flat, a middle, and a bottom, I get about half my bites on the float, and I get about 40% of my bites on the flat lines. And then the middle line, maybe 7%. The bottom line, maybe 3%. All I'm saying is that final 10% is somehow shared between the 2 lines that have weights on them. So to me, if you're getting that few bites on those 2 lines, why even bother dedicating any energy to them at all when you could double up on these? So you're going to be getting more bites, although every now and then, yep, there's a fish that would have seen the bottom line that didn't see the float line. I will sacrifice that fish so that I can have 10 more fish. But not only are the percentages not worth bothering with, but you also have the trash multiplier. How I arrived at this number, it's negative 10,000. This is the trash multiplier. How I arrived at it is I completely made it up. But if you take, say, the bottom line, 3%, so 3 out of 100 fish eat that bottom line, tarpon. But then you consider the fact that over that time, you've caught way more stingrays, sharks, and catfish on that bottom line. And you multiply that by negative 10,000, that's how many tarpon you actually caught. You caught like negative 30,000 tarpon because you had that bottom line, because you were dealing with sharks, dealing with catfish, dealing with stingrays, when you could have had lines out catching tarpon. And this is all completely made up, but I hope it illustrates the point that not only do you get less bites on these lines, but they also cause you more problems because that's where the trash fish are. You will definitely catch more trash fish putting lines on the bottom, without a doubt. You will be dealing with more headaches. Now, where does this not apply? It doesn't apply if the water's really deep. 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 feet of water. If you're marking fish at 50 feet, put a sinker on your line and send it 50 feet down and put a bait in their face. Because this is not the same thing. You're not on the anchor, you're not setting up a spread waiting on the fish to come by. You're going to sniper some fish. So if you're marking fish at a certain depth, put a bait at that depth, for sure. And use common sense. There's going to be times where it's like, it just makes more sense to put a weight on the line. By all means, do that. But your standard, this is how you're going to start your day spread. This is how I come out of the gate rigged up. This is when I first put my anchor down and I start setting up, getting ready for the fish to come through. This is the spread that I'm putting out until something tells me I need to change something. This is pretty standard. I guess that's it. If there's anything else you want to know about tarpon, I'm probably going to leave the tarpon subject alone. I've covered the basics, but if there's anything else you want to know, ask me and I'll try to answer that. And we'll get into something different on the next one. I'll put some thought into it. But thanks. Tight lines.